This is going to be another episode where I talk specifically to my fellow people pleasers out there. I want all of us to understand that when we over empathize with other people, we abandon ourselves. And this is specifically about over empathizing. Of course, empathizing with people is really important. It's part of what creates connections and community, which is what we need as humans. I'm not saying that you shouldn't have connections and you shouldn't empathize with people. And sometimes, putting down what you might need in certain cases to help somebody else. Sure. It's about give and take. It's about balance. It's about knowing when to ask and when to give. However, if you were conditioned to be a people pleaser from a young age, you probably are familiar with the idea of over empathizing with other people, over understanding them, over giving, and then feeling like you are left by yourself, right? That you are empty, that there's no one there for you. And you might not consciously realize this. This is something that has taken me many years to understand about myself and my own patterns and behaviors when it comes to people pleasing. Over time, you start to feel, I think, at least from my own experience, you start to feel abandoned. And you don't understand why. Because you think, if I overgive, if I over-empathize, if I treat this person the way I wish someone would treat me, or the way I wish I would have been treated when I was younger, then maybe by proxy, I'll feel the way I want to feel. Or maybe they'll give me some of that back. However, when we do that, and we have this assumption that we'll get this experience, this feeling, this empathy in return when we overgive it to somebody else, and that person is not equipped to do that, or they haven't signed the same agreement that you have signed in your head, and they don't give it back to us, whether they're unwilling to, whether they can't, whatever, we end up feeling empty and drained and abandoned and alone. The way we might have felt abandoned when we were younger. The way maybe we felt unempathized with when we were young and we needed that. So I want to emphasize that when we over-empathize, when we overgive, when we overdo it to hope that somebody will give it back to us or that we will find acceptance, appreciation from somebody, we end up abandoning ourselves. And when we abandon ourselves, we don't empathize with ourselves, we don't feel taken care of. We don't trust ourselves anymore. And if we don't trust the person that we're supposed to trust, which is us, the most important person in our lives to an extent, how are we going to navigate life? How do we exist knowing that the person that we are with all the time, ourselves, is also our biggest enemy in many cases? It's the person that we fear the most, or the person that we don't feel seen by. It's very difficult then to navigate life, to do the things you want to do, to achieve the things you want to achieve, to feel the way you want to feel. Because you don't see yourself as the source of that. You don't see yourself as capable of giving it to you. And I think as I've learned through therapy and the work I've done throughout my life, this mirrors the relationship you might have had with your parents, right? You now become this parental figure to yourself, and your inner child and your parental version of you are mirroring and exemplifying the same kind of dynamic and relationship in your life. But now it's just you. And sometimes it can feel like you're a little bit split here, right? It's your parent self and your younger inner child who's still needy and scared and confused, who needs to feel supported and empathized and understood by this, adult figure or this authoritative figure. But you are also that figure now as an adult, and you have to step up and be that person for yourself. And this isn't to shame anybody for this, of course. It's so difficult to firstly recognize that this is happening and then to change it. It's so difficult. It's a program that's deeply ingrained. It's a program that runs without us even realizing it, and we just act in accordance with it because it's all we know. It's what feels the safest or the most normal for us, right? But it's important to recognize those moments when you feel abandoned by yourself, when you overgive, when you over-empathize with other people, when you are there for them to the extent that you are draining yourself. Of course, be there for people. That's the point of relationships, and allow yourself to be taken care of by them too. Because sometimes I find as well that when you are a people pleaser and you've been conditioned to be there for other people all the time, you don't know how to let other people be there for you. And so you close off to that, and then that feels even more draining because maybe you over-empathize with somebody who's actually capable of giving you some of that empathy in return, some of that understanding in return, but you are closed off to receiving it. So that also makes you feel abandoned and not seen. But it's also you closing yourself off. It's also you stopping yourself from receiving that. And that's another reason why you would then not trust yourself. So I think it's really important to recognize these things. I've had to work on it myself. It's, again, easier said than done. But it does make a huge difference when you recognize what's happening and when you conserve some of that energy, some of that empathy, some of that understanding, not out of maliciousness, not out of hatred towards people, not out of, oh, like, I'm not going to give because I deserve better. Not from that kind of headspace. That's not the point of this. The point is to make sure that you are also a supportive energy for yourself, that you're there for yourself. And you cannot be there for yourself if you don't have the energy. If you're not able to, if your cup is empty, you can't be there for yourself. It's not possible. But then that creates that vicious cycle of, okay, I'm drained. I can't be there for myself because I'm not conserving this energy. So now I can't trust myself to be a person who's there for me. And so I'm not going to look to myself anymore for this support. I'm going to keep looking to other people, and I'm going to try and get the support by over empathizing, over giving to them. But they might not be able to give it in return. And so, that cycle continues over and over again. And it's so exhausting. It's very isolating. It can be very scary because that's your inner child now at the forefront. That's your inner child trying to navigate life as an adult. And that's not their responsibility. Just like it wasn't your responsibility to have to try and gain acceptance and care and empathy from those around you when you were a kid. It's also not your inner child's responsibility now. But of course, it's really hard to break out of your inner child mindset and to bring your adult self to the forefront. Because if you were conditioned to believe that you have to give in order to receive, or that others hold the power of care, support, safety, you probably don't feel like you are capable of it as an adult. Because, the thought might be, well, who am I? I need to ask others. I need others to do that for me. Other people need to give me these things. And of course, in many cases, yes, other people should and do need to give you those things, right? And it's okay to ask for it. It's not needy or codependent. But also, there are many instances where you can and should give it to yourself because it's just as important. And you might not be stepping into the opportunities that you could be giving to yourself because you don't think you're capable of it. You don't think you're worthy of it. You think it's only valuable if it comes from somebody else. That's not true. What you show yourself, the kind of care, empathy, understanding you show yourself is just as important. I know that's hard to believe. Again, if you were conditioned to not look at yourself as a capable authority figure or somebody who is worthy of that, you don't see yourself as important in many ways, which is really sad if you think about it. But you are. And the way to start believing that is to step into it. So what I've had to do throughout my life is, especially when it comes to my close relationships and friendships, is to know when to stop empathizing. Not in a malicious way, and not to completely cut myself off and become like cold-hearted. That's not the point. It's to know what your limits are, what your boundaries are, because you do have to have boundaries with yourself, with the people in your life. And that's not a bad thing. Boundaries are not a bad thing. Boundaries are not a sign that you hate somebody, or they're not a punishment to the other person. They're actually coming from an act of love, an act of care for them, to show them where your boundaries are so that you can conserve some energy for yourself. Because if you can't give to yourself, then you can't appropriately give to another person after, because then you're pouring from an empty cup. When you pour from an empty cup, there's resentment, there's frustration, there's exhaustion, and that doesn't feel good for the other person anyway. So knowing when to not empathize as much, knowing when to conserve some of that care or consideration for yourself is an act of love both to you and to the other person. Your people pleaser brain won't think that initially. It'll think that you are in some way being bad or wrong or punishing somebody, and then that'll maybe trigger more of that over empathizing of like, no, I have to give more because that's how I show love. And again, yes, empathy is a way to show love, totally. But you are people too. You have to show that to yourself too. It's not up to somebody else to show that to you, and it's not up to you to show it only to somebody else. You matter as well. And that's really important. And it's not just important for you in this individualistic sense. Like I said before, it's important to other people as well in your life. It actually is beneficial to them for you to know what your limits are when it comes to over empathizing, over understanding, over giving. It's not a punishment. It's not a bad thing. It's actually good for everybody to know what your limits and boundaries are. It's healthy for you. And it'll feel so much better. And you'll feel like your connections are actually more authentic when that happens, because they're not coming from a place of, I need to over empathize. I need to show this person how important they are because, I never did. So you're kind of, again, doing it via proxy almost, trying to give what you wish you would have gotten. That's not quite authentic, right? Because it's not coming from a place of, focusing more on them. It's coming from a place of also focusing on yourself in a way of trying to remedy maybe some of that emotional neglect as a child. That's not the responsibility of this relationship. That you have to work on with yourself. You can't loop somebody else into that. And again, yes, of course, people and relationships can help you through that, totally. But in order to maintain an authentic connection with somebody, that stuff shouldn't be at the forefront of it. So it'll feel more authentic when you connect with people from this place of not over empathizing all the time, and it'll foster a healthier, more enjoyable connection. Again, this is just my own experience. I'm not a therapist. I've just had to really work on this. And I've seen throughout the years how much it is possible to change and how much better your connections can feel when they're coming from this place. So I hope this was helpful. I hope it was informative. If you want to hear more from me, I have a Substack where I write essays about topics like these. I also have my Instagram, my TikTok, where I post my videos, post my life content. And if you want to talk with me about these things and we can explore these ideas together, you can book a one-to-one call over on my website. Other than that, thank you for listening, and I'll be back again soon with another episode.